Hi there. Welcome back to another episode of The Feminine Frequency. Today, I have my great friend and amazing colleague, Alyssa Rizzo. She is a transformational coach, healer, and priestess. Welcome, Alyssa.
Yeah, I'm so excited. I'm so excited. I'm so excited.
Mm, yes, me too. And today we have a really juicy topic. We're talking about the sister wound, which I think is just such an important thing for women to understand and to contemplate and reflect on in their own life, in their own beliefs, subconscious and conscious, and how they really interact with other women, but also with themselves. Um, because I don't know how familiar our audience is with a sister wound. Typically, if you were to go Google about the sister wound, you would find that it's typically associated with the period of history, which is usually referred to as the burning times or, the witch hunts in Salem. There's also the Holy Inquisition, those kinds of periods of history where um, women were really persecuted and hunted out and punished and killed for being witches, right? So um there was a lot of ancestral trauma around those times in history. There was a lot of generational wounding that occurred because a lot of us had ancestors, right, that were maybe persecuted, maybe killed, maybe exiled from their homes because they were thought to have these, characteristics which people associated with witches. But there were also, what happened was sometimes women would sell out other women. Maybe it was their actual sister, maybe it was their friend, maybe it was a cousin or what have you. But it would happen because, of course, women were very, very scared, right? And were trying to protect themselves and protect their families. So they would sometimes have reason to try to protect themselves by selling out another woman. So that is said to be sort of the root of some of this really subconscious patterning and ancestral wounding, which we kind of call the sister wound. Um, and it can manifest in a lot of different ways, right? We've got the classic mean girl behavior, which we've probably all experienced in one form or another throughout our girlhood and maybe even adulthood, where we've been the mean girl or we've experienced it and been on the other end of it. Um, And it can also just manifest as like a general distrust in other women or disdain for women or disdain or distrust of anything that is characteristically feminine. And I think that that also translates to what's feminine in ourselves, right? If we're a woman who has disdain for other women or feminine aspects, then we're also going to place that judgment and criticism on ourselves as women, right? So it can be it can be a really deeply rooted thing. And I know for me, I've had my own personal journey with this. I, looking back, can definitely see how I had sort of a negative a negative opinion of things, characteristics and traits that were deemed feminine, such as sensitivity being
Yep.
one.
Me too. Yep.
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah, women who like placed a lot of value on self-care and, things like that. I would maybe have said they were high maintenance or they were, not being productive enough because I was very wrapped up and over-identified with my masculine for quite some time and, as a young woman with my masculine energy. So, I definitely have had to go through the process of like healing this sister wound in myself. And And so I know too that this happens with a lot of other women that I've worked with, friends of mine. They've um, become aware of the sister wound and they've proactively been working to heal it. And it's been one of the most powerful things ever because when we do heal the sister wound and when we do value other women, when we value our own femininity, it can really increase our self-worth. It can increase our personal power, our sense of community, our sense of belonging. Um, it just can be such an amazing, amazing thing. So I just wanted to lay a little bit of context for anyone that wasn't familiar with the sister wound. And I'm excited to have this conversation with you, Alyssa, because I know we've been working together and just going deeper in our own friendship for quite some time now. And this is something that's only possible because we've both done the work of healing this
Yeah.
sister wound, right?
Yeah. And I think, other symptoms of the sister wound that you can see is like jealousy. Jealousy and envy is a way that, and then that can lead to gossip or backbiting. It can lead to that like mean girl kind of dynamic. And I
Yeah.
think so, I heard a coach say like 7 or 8 years ago, like pay attention when you're jealous of somebody. Like it's probably something that you want. And I like loved that reframe because it sort of showed, and also as women, like we're conditioned, especially in this culture, to settle for whatever is being given. And we're supposed to be grateful for whatever we have and like not long or yearn or desire for more, whatever more
Mm.
is, unless it is like something that we can personally like spin our energy up in order to create, right? Like through our own personal efforts we can manifest $1 million or have a business that drives wealth or whatever. Like, but like, who do you think you are? You're too big for your britches, right? Like that was in like my Irish Catholic working class extended family kind of growing up. Like that stuff was still very much in the ethers of my parents' generation, and they didn't necessarily do any of that subjugation of my sibling and I, but again, this ancestral wounding, right? Like this is how it comes. So like even though it wasn't necessarily put on us by my parents, that thread, like I felt that thread from our Irish working class ancestors. Like how dare you want more, you know? And I think that one of the things that I've learned from you, Carrie, is like women, like desire is part of feminine energy. Like desire is part of creation, desire is part of creativity. Desire is the birthplace of expansion, of growth, of transformation, of change, of new beginnings, of new things happening. And desire is also the birthplace of joy and play and pleasure and fun. And these are all pieces of the feminine that we forget. Like maybe
Mhm.
we understand pleasure is part of the feminine because sexual energy and sensual energy, especially sensual, is highly feminine, but sensual can be in a masculine expression as well. But play and fun, like, and like Liz Gilbert likes to say, I have never known in my life a truly relaxed woman. And
Yeah,
and where are our role models for playfulness, joy, and fun
right,
in
right.
like women, right? We've got like Carrie and I talk a lot in our work together about archetypes, right? We've got like the boss
Mhm.
bitch babe. We've got like the queen who's on top of her shit, the global expander. Um, but like where is these like, and not childlike, but just playful, enthusiastic, sharing our joy. And that is part of like the overflow of the feminine. Like she brings life. Part of the feminine is a bringer of life and a life bringer. And I
Right.
think sometimes we've gotten so judged by, you know, other women. And I think that a huge, Carrie and I talk a lot in our work around how patriarchy has gotten in the way. But I would like to say that we as women have so internalized these cultural norms that we don't even need the power structure to like enforce them on us. We now self police in our
Yeah,
own communities with each other.
it's internalized.
It's
Yeah.
totally internalized, and we self-police ourselves, and then we police other groups of women or other individuals of women. And we gotta, like, that's part of what needs a lot of healing and a
Yeah.
lot of breaking through. And so for me, I really liked that there was a word for this wounding that women have at the hands of each other, that sister wound, because it provides a path to understand, like, okay, what's actually happening here, and then, like, how do we clear that?
Mm-hmm.
How do we handle that? And how many women listening to this, like, how many of us do not have wounding at the hands of another woman? Like, go ahead and raise your, like, right, like, let's raise our hands. Like, is that really even something that exists? um and and some women have been so ostracized by other women that they can't be in relationship, close, emotionally, intimately, relationally, with other
Right.
women. And that's just heartbreaking, I think.
Yeah, and I think that's why this is such an important topic right now, is because the way that we can heal individually and collectively as women from internalized misogyny, patriarchal programming, and, all the things that come from that. One of the best ways to heal is to come together in sisterhood, come together in community, and to start to reflect our strengths back to each other and start to, celebrate our femininity instead of sort of diminishing it or defiling it, or suppressing it, to really acknowledge, celebrate what our unique gifts are, what our sacred gifts are as women, and to lift each other up instead of, like you said, being jealous or competitive with one another or trying to knock each other down to, gain more status or attention or whatever it is, or success for ourselves, to come together in sisterhood, because that's a really magical healing thing. And you mentioned archetypes, the sister circle is an archetype, and that's because it goes back to ancient times. Women have been gathering in sister circles, since the beginning of time. They've been coming together in community. They've been supporting each other um, and creating these healing circles, these healing centers, because there are certain things that women go through in life that men just don't understand and can't speak to and can't relate to, right? Birth, menstruation, right? Just to name a couple. So it's important that women have these places and these sacred spaces, really, to come together and be vulnerable, to support, and to just acknowledge and witness each other in these experiences that we all have. And so, again, ancient people knew this, indigenous people know this, like, and it's a sacred thing, it's an archetype. But in modern society, it has somewhat been kind of lost, right? I mean, women can still come together, obviously, but a lot of times it's, for business or for community service or for a charity or whatever it is. And a lot of times we still don't have that place where we can just show up as we are and we can just be vulnerable and say, yeah, I'm not okay today. Yeah, I feel
Right.
sad, or yeah, I need
Right.
support, right? Um, and even
Unmask. Masking is a really big word. You can
unmasking.
unmask, and that's a really new.
And that can feel very isolating. That can, because when you're going through something and you're not sharing it with anyone, it feels lonely. And it can even, then you start to layer shame on top of whatever you're going through because you're not being your authentic self. So there, being in sister circles is therapeutic. It's empowering to have that place.
Healthy. Being in healthy sister circle.
Correct.
And we
Yep.
should, I think, start defining what does that look like. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, yes, definitely.
Mhm.
And a sister circle, by nature of the definition, is a place where everyone is equal, right? There's no hierarchy. That's why it's a circle. Everyone is equal power. and everyone can be a teacher, everyone can be a healer, and everyone can learn and everyone can be healed, right? It's like that just community vibe rather than there's a leader and everyone's here to, respect and honor one or two people. So that's what's so nourishing about it, I feel. And there was, of course, again, just looking back on the history of all of this, there was a time, I think it was during the 1400s, when women were forbidden by law to
Yeah.
gather together. And
Yeah.
there was actually a law passed that had, allowed men, husbands to keep their wives at home, that made them keep their wives at home
Yep.
and not go and gather in these friendship circles or sister circles because evidently people in power knew that it was quite
Women talk
powerful when women talk and get together in these
and
groups.
share information.
Yeah.
Women are not submissive as a group, we um Yeah, and I think that even in this culture, when you look at how women have accessed their power throughout, and it's really, in the United States, like women didn't get the right to vote until um the 1910s, I think it was like 1917, 1919,
1920.
um 1920. Okay, fabulous. And
Quite well.
and so much of that, to bring also back to indigenous history, so many of the women who were originally conceiving of the idea of fighting for the right for women to vote looked at the Iroquois nation in uh, upstate New York, and Elizabeth Cady Stanton and a lot of her
Mm.
contemporaries were looking at how Iroquois women could do things. They were respected voices of tribal leadership. They weren't just like existing alongside the men, living with the dictates of what the men decided that them or the community would experience. So like women were able to control their pregnancies, like how many children they had. They were able to space their children out. They were respected leadership voices. They were at the planning tables, they were at the peace tables, they were at the councils. And so they weren't second class citizens. And so these women were like looking at the Iroquois women and the Iroquois communities and being like, whoa, because sometimes we forget that we have to see something alternative to what our lived reality is to realize that there can, like, something can be different. And,
Mm.
Carrie and I really wanted to come on, and the entire basis, we do a lot of professional work together for, women's empowerment and women coming into their personal power and their spiritual authority, is providing a different way to understand a situation. And sometimes you have to be exposed to a new perspective or a new paradigm to realize that the paradigm that you're in is A, limiting, B, disempowering, doesn't actually serve you, and maybe even doesn't serve the people around you, including you. And this is what so many women have been waking up to in, like, yes, women from the founding of this country were excluded from, being a meaningful participant, even though, like, Abigail Adams equally wrote so much of our founding documents because she was her husband's confidant and, would provide a lot of feedback and would receive his first drafts about things. Um, and so we do have founding mothers that, and in this country, but they didn't have any power beyond the influence that they had access to with their husbands. um and so in this country we have had women fighting for our empowerment since the dawn of our country, but we've only been able to access personal individual power relatively recently for us to be able to become something more than what the resources around us kind of relegated us to.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so our nervous systems, it's new for our nervous systems to be able to be in our personal sovereignty where we can make choices that we're not necessarily having to appease other while also trying to find a way to honor ourselves
Right.
and make sure that our kids are taken care of and we're not cast out in the streets and we're not stuck in a situation where we can't provide for ourselves. And so many, most women do have children. I know there's a lot of childless women, but that's kind of, women and children are kind of synonymous, and motherhood is synonymous with being a woman and caring for children and the responsibility of those children is usually on the mothers. And it's not necessarily a shared responsibility, even if there's a male financial provider in the picture. Um,
Oh. And
and go ahead. I don't want to.
yeah, sorry. I was going to say, yeah, and I think that's, if you think about it, it's really understandable that women have this sort of undercurrent of competitiveness with each other
Yes,
because it
absolutely.
wasn't very long ago when, that was the only way for a woman to have a livelihood at all was to have a man to provide for her. That was it. That was her pretty much only opportunity. So she was quite literally competing with other women for a man to provide for her, right?
Yep.
I mean, we didn't, as women just a few generations ago, just did not have the option for financial independence,
Autonomy.
security, or autonomy without a man.
Yeah, and that, when your security comes from something outside of you, it can bring out a lot of squirrely behavior internally. You can become
Sure.
something that isn't the personal expression of who you are and who you want to be and like what your actual values are, or like your personhood as like a shining light of God.
Yeah.
And I think it's important that um it's so easy to think sometimes that we can be above certain pettinesses. And it's very important to realize, oh, maybe I'm not. Okay, maybe I'm activated here. Maybe I've got some jealousy here. Maybe I want what she has. Like maybe,
Mhm.
those spaces where like those kinds of thoughts are like bubbling up within us because it's so easy to fall into patterns of mistrust because that's where we go when there's been a wound. We don't necessarily immediately go into competition, we don't necessarily immediately go into these things like that. The undercurrent is a sense of not
Right.
trusting the other, not trusting the situation, not trusting that people are going to protect us or have our back. And then that can sometimes erode our own self-trust or feel like lone wolf syndrome. The only person that we can trust is ourselves. And um and I see that, especially if you've been hurt by other women, especially groups of women,
Hmm.
that makes you feel like the only person that you can trust is yourself.
Yeah.
And in this culture, we have, especially right now, we have an extreme hyper individualization of everything. And women are also like, I don't need a man. I don't need a provider. I can take care of myself, blah, 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 blah. And it's like, okay, there's nothing wrong with being able to create individual success on your own terms. Like women have been fighting for this since the dawn of this country, right? Like I celebrate that. I
100.
used to be
Yeah.
one of those women. That is so incredible. And then I learned this term, interdependence, and all of a sudden something clicked for me. And I
Yeah.
had it was like the minute I learned that term, I had no interest in being a lone wolf creator anymore. And like that was the goal. Like that was from the time I was a little girl, strong, independent
Right.
woman, knew the archetype. I was like, I don't know if I could be her.
Yeah.
And um and then in my early 20s learning this concept of interdependence and all of a sudden realizing like I didn't even know I was making it all on my shoulders. I didn't even know that I was
Right.
carrying this pressure to like make everything happen. And I didn't know that I was
Yeah.
being hyper responsible with my own energy and trying to make everything work. And it was like learning this word, like all this air I got to exhale. Like, whew. Like I don't have to create everything myself.
Right.
And that for me became the new paradigm for marriage for me. And I sort of, you know, when my sister and I were like dreamscaping partners in our early 20s, we both knew we wanted to be married. We would refer to our partners as our future spouses. And I didn't know it at the time, but a lot of things that I was talking about was I was like, "Oh, I I view this as the two of us coming together, and together we can create more than either one of us is going to be able to create individually." And I wish, and that's the same true for sister circle. So I'm using the paradigm of the partnership with, for me it's the masculine. Um and but like together we can create more, we can do more, we can, you know,
Mhm.
it's both the shared burden makes everything lighter, but also the exponential creation of what
Yeah.
can happen either in a dyad, just a dyad. And Carrie and I can tell you all kinds of the magic that we've been unfolding and discovering in just our
Mhm.
little friendship in our dyad. But when you have those concentric circles of even more people coming together, just, this is how long-term projects get created over time. And, Carrie, you were in the movie business, right? Like,
Yeah.
movies do not happen in lone warrior kind of
No.
circumstances. Like, you have teams of, it takes decades sometimes for those projects to come to completion. And how it's not just the individuals working on the projects, it's all these other people behind the scenes and the relationships that happen.
Yeah.
And
I love that concept of interdependence. I think that is such a refreshing paradigm to look at because like you I was very much like yeah independence is the end all be all, right? Like I want to be independent in every way. I mean even married, like I still wanted to like have control over everything and be able to make my own choices, make my own decisions, and just yeah be my own woman, right? Be my own woman. But like yeah, this concept of interdependence was super helpful because we can't do it all alone, right? And I got to a place where, it was just, and it still is hard for me to ask for help. This is something I still struggle with. I'm like, and I'm working on it like every day. I take baby steps. I'm like, let me just ask for help here. And it's so much more nourishing. It's so much more supportive to know that you're part of something bigger than yourself. You have a support system, you have a community. Not only that, people want to help you.
yes,
People want to support you just the same way that I want to support others, right? Like there needs to be a give and take. You need to have that receivership channel open or energy stagnates and you don't get to have that flow, that exponential
yeah,
movement of creating something bigger because we're made to give and receive as human beings. We're here
right,
to have that interdependence. That's how we've been throughout our evolution. What was it like 200,000 years or something? We were hunters and gatherers, right? Or maybe more.
yeah,
So
probably
we
more like
lived
a
in
millennia.
tribes. Yeah,
Right.
right. Close. Yes. We lived in tribes. We moved in groups. Like there was
Mm-mm.
no way somebody could live without a tribe.
Individualism is a very modern concept. I
Hmm.
would say it's
Yeah.
totally new in the 20th century. This like rugged individualism is an invention of modern times because if you just look at that history, I'm sorry, I don't want to interrupt you, but yeah, if you look at that history, like
Yeah.
there was no opportunity for individualism to create anything.
Right. It was all about the community. It was all about belonging to something bigger than yourself and how that could serve and support you and how you could serve the group as well. So, um, yeah, so I think it can be hard on us psychologically, mentally, emotionally when we try to just be this island, right? It's not going to work long term, right? And so
Yeah.
if we really want to thrive and self-actualize, we do need a supportive community and not only the partnership and the family, but also other women, because
Yeah, and
we have that female experience. We have those things that men don't understand that we need to have that kind of connection for to nourish that part of ourselves. Whoops, did you freeze?
I am struggling with my internet connection. It is
You're
telling me
back
that my
now.
connection is unstable. We're just gonna have to ride the wave and surf with it and hope that it's not too interruptive. Um,
Yeah, so
because there's really not much I could do about that.
you're fine, you're fine.
Let's see if it comes back.
I think you're good.
Okay. Yeah, and I think, Brene Brown talks a lot about how humans, we are neurobiologically hardwired for connection. And I think the reason why, and her whole body of work is about what gets in the way of connection. And that really resonated with me because as a healer, I think our default as humans is to trust each other. I don't actually think our default is to
Mm.
mistrust. And I think the mistrust comes from the wounding,
Yeah,
individual and collective. If we are
sure.
neurobiologically hardwired for connection, then it makes sense that our instinct is to lean in to each other, and the only reason why it doesn't happen is because there's hurt that happened. And I think that you know, we are in a very different kind of style of community in sort of our modern era, specifically in the Western world, particularly in the United States, where we no longer live in, the nuclear family is like the Western model of community. And the nuclear family is so isolating for everybody. It's isolating for the parents of children. It can be very isolating for children. I mean, they are in school, but then it's like kids don't go out in the neighborhood block anymore and like roam around as you know a unsupervised gang of kids, kind of
My kids do,
figuring.
but I know
Oh,
we're
that's fantastic.
yeah.
Wild and free. That's
Yeah.
fabulous. um
We're lucky that way. We have a great neighborhood.
That
So,
is fantastic, and this nuclear family model that's been prized as sort of the epitome of modern culture has become really isolating because we've lived in multi-generational families that shared houses for that was the evolution of humanity. And to
yeah.
have two people providing for the needs of everyone in the family is burning everybody out, and
Mhm.
specifically women are being burned out. But like, make no mistake about it, the men are burning out too. They're just as exhausted. But I think women, it's easier for us to talk about it, and we are able to come together and other moms with other women. And culture is on our side with women sharing vulnerability with each other because women are allowed to have emotional connection, whereas the masculine, they're not even allowed to have emotional connection, have emotions, or yearn for that, as including outside of maybe their
Right.
intimacy and connection with their spouse. And it just goes to even more illustrate the point of like sisterhood and community is it's the antidotal medicine to
Mm.
a lot of the emotional and spiritual needs that people are having. And we are the most addicted, drugged, including pharmaceuticals, like food, like our health markers, especially in this country, are just they're tanking. And rates of isolation and loneliness and community and kinship, and deep connection and feeling connected to people in your community, feeling like other people care about you and you're invested and care about other people, not in like this global perspective of like, oh, well, I don't want people to suffer and I'll like donate to, our local charities, but like the actual ties of intimacy and human connection are lifeblood. And they are
Yeah.
just as important. Even Brene Brown, we're neurobiological hard for connection, but Brene Brown even talks about like love and belonging are deep human needs. And when
Oh,
those
yeah.
aren't present, horrible things happen.
Mm-hmm. Right.
And, Carrie and I kind of feel like human connection, especially through sisterhood, through the portal of sisterhood, is the antidote for those
Absolutely.
things. And with this hyper individualization, and I can do it myself, we've forgotten that we need community. We've forgotten that we desire, like, we've tried to cut off, I think, the desire for community because we
Yeah.
judge ourselves for needing it, because we're like, well, I should be able to do everything ourselves myself because that's what culture tells me. And it's like, actually, no. No, we're actually fighting against our neurobiological hardwiring.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, and just to share like some kind of tips or strategies for starting to heal this sister wound or even just become more aware and attuned to how it might be showing up. You know, one of the things that helped me a lot, and this is just like a quick tip, and I learned it from Mama Gina, Regina Thomas Hauer, who has a lot of great resources on this, was just to whenever you see a woman even online or in real life, like wherever you see a woman, you just look for one beautiful thing about her. Any woman. It's it's so simple, right? It sounds like too simple, but I tell you, it is so profound. And I've been doing this now for several years, and it's become a habit for me. Every time I see a woman, I see beauty. I just do. Because every woman is beautiful. Every woman is beautiful without exception. It's just that in our society, we have such a default instinct to, it's not necessarily instinct because it's not innate, but it's a default reaction to judge and criticize
Yep.
women because we have these beauty standards that we absorb our whole entire lives through the media and everything else. Um, and so we look at women with a critical eye. And guess what? That includes ourselves,
Yep.
women.
Absolutely.
We're our own worst critics, right? So we're constantly like looking at our own reflection, looking at our own pictures and our own images. And usually for a lot of women, the first thing they do is look for what they don't like.
Yep. Inner
They
flaws.
start picking themselves apart. When you start looking at women and looking for what's beautiful about them, you start seeing what's beautiful about them. You start realizing every woman is so beautiful. Okay. And it doesn't even mean that you have to tell her, you don't have to compliment
Points if you do. Points
her.
if
But
you
yes,
do.
if you do even better.
Yep. I
It just,
encourage
this
that.
is
It makes,
more like
yeah.
for your own internal dialogue, right? Your own acknowledgement. And when you do this habitually, you start to then, of course, see your own beauty when you look in the mirror as well. Because we have that, reflexive relationship with other women. When we appreciate them, we start to appreciate ourselves. When we stop judging them, we stop judging ourselves. So it's a really simple but profound practice that I found to be super healing. I
Ooh,
want to keep
I
doing
love that. Yes,
that.
yes. We definitely want to talk about some ways to work with the sister wound, rather than just discussing it. And I love, I think that for women, because we don't necessarily fall into community, we oftentimes have to create and nurture connection with other people. And this way that
Mhm.
Carrie has of noticing something that's beautiful in the women around you, and if you can get to the place where you feel comfortable starting to vocalize that, that can create magic and connections in ways that you never thought was possible. Because who doesn't like to be complimented by another woman?
Yes.
Right? And a lot of times that feels safer, going back to all of our witch wounds and all of our wounding. It can be safer to receive positive attention from another woman than the opposite sex for many women. And it allows us to put our guard down even for a half second, just kind of open up, right? Like our heart can come out, our chest can kind of open, instead of just that sort of closed posture so many of us just walk around with like our back off cloaks on.
Mhm.
And but like, what woman doesn't love to be told those are amazing boots, and your haircut looks fantastic, and I love the style of your sweater, or your bag is like giving me so much joy right now,
One of my
like,
favorite things is getting a compliment from an older woman. I
oh,
don't know. It's just like, there's no agenda. There's nothing, you know what I mean? It's just like,
pure
it's, I don't know.
celebration.
It's just pure love. Yeah. You're just like, wow, thank you.
Yeah. I see you, right? How many of
Yeah.
us don't feel seen? We don't feel seen. And like, having a way to see other people sometimes allows us to feel comfortable with being seen. So many of us are trying to hide too because we don't feel comfortable. We're assessing for safety,
Yep.
and we're not available for connection until the environment or the people around us has proven that it's an environment that is safe for us, or that we want to be available, or we want to open up. And
100%.
we've really, um we've gotten a lot, there's a lot of stickiness around being available and open for connection in today's modern culture. And it's like, oh, I don't want to impose, like, oh, what if they're not open for connection? Like, these little ways of like, sliding the invitation across the table with just like, your boots are amazing, like that can open some doors that otherwise, you know, I think we are all longing and yearning for connection, but there are some of us that are more willing to give ourselves permission to put a foot out there, and that's how I identify. I have no problem being the stranger. I heard this phrase a couple years ago and I didn't like click for me, but I heard it and I was like, the phrase was, a stranger is just a friend you haven't met yet. And I didn't realize that I've been living my life that way since I went on study abroad and didn't know a single person, 14 years ago. Completely by myself, didn't know anybody. So you have to make friends, otherwise you're going to be bored and isolated the whole time. And the other part about my study abroad experience, we were 600 college students on a cruise ship for a semester together, and most of us didn't know each other. So everybody was available for connection. Everybody wanted to know everybody else because nobody knew each other. And they were the coolest people we've ever met. One of my best
Wow.
friends in the whole wide world was homeschooled in Fairbanks, Alaska, by two academics. And so he had a really unique story. And then I met my best friend that I call her my sister, and we bonded over having read Eat, Pray, Love. And you had to be open to connection because otherwise, like, what kind of experience you gonna have? Like stranger danger? Like, what
Yeah,
is
it's
that?
almost like
We're
summer
gonna
camp, right?
Right,
It's like,
exactly.
yeah.
Summer camp. We're gonna be stuck in a boat together. Like, there's
Hmm.
no elbow room here. Like, we might as well make friends. And it was just this really cool petri dish of being like allowing yourself to be open, which isn't necessarily taught in this culture, is like how to be open to people.
No.
People are being shown, it's like stranger danger first from the time we're like 3 years old, which is okay. We want to teach our children discernment, healthy discernment. But you know
Right.
I teach my 3-year-old, like, the vast majority of people are happy and they want to help you and they'll do anything for you. Most people will help a stranger in danger, like, or
Hmm.
who's in distress, especially if
Yeah.
you ask. Most people will surprise you by how willing they're willing to be. And just, I think that's the part that I want to start with here, is just talking about like being willing to be open.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. Like we see in our culture, we see vulnerability as such a weakness, right? We see that as a liability. And yet vulnerability, as Brene Brown talks about all the time, is the connective tissue of relationships.
Right.
And we as people, as women, as humans, we need to be seen, right? We need to be witnessed in our authentic truth. Otherwise, we get depressed, we get anxious, we feel isolated, we feel lonely. Like so much comes from that. And it's like, how do we, in our human experience, how do we make sense of it? How do we move through the phases of our lives and our evolutions that we go through, the rites of passage that we go through, if we're not allowed to express the internal experience that we're having and to be witnessed in it, right? Like that's part of why we're here. So, um, yeah, so having a community or a safe place to be vulnerable and to be witnessed is like imperative to our psycho-spiritual growth. And
Yeah.
so that's something the Sister Circle and a community of women can provide.
And, there are certain aspects of, being open to connection does not necessarily mean being available for everything right away, right? Like, you don't have to go on a week-long first date with a new best friend and like share all of your secrets right away. It's okay to honor, I call it titrating your nervous system. Like, I feel
Mhm.
open talking about these topics and I feel open to start to connect in these ways. And I'm probably like too open in a lot of ways, because I can jump into, especially when I feel a deep connection with somebody, I go all in right away, and usually it works,
Beautiful.
and 90% of the time it's a slam dunk. But I can not do any due diligence about whether or not that person or that container can hold everything that I'm bringing in, and it can crash or it can burn out if the other person's like, I'm not prepared for this. So I've also learned not necessarily to hold back, but to pay attention to like, what are the dynamics that are needed for me in an intimate container, for me to be well supported in an intimate container, and how do I be able to discern, how do I be able to like read the person, read our interactions, and read the situation to see whether or not whether it's more of my bigness or deeper shares or like certain kinds of topics. And like that's part of healthy vulnerability too. You know, Brene Brown also talks about vulnerability without boundaries is not authenticity and true vulnerability. And so we get to have boundaries and in relationship and feel and work at the pace that our comfort zone allows, right? The coaching industry is like, push outside your comfort zone, blah, 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 blah. Well, first of all, like wade in and then signal safety to your nervous system and allow your nervous system to acclimate to that new normal. And from there, you can decide where you want to go. It's not always about pushing yourself into the deepest immediately
Right.
right away, especially if you don't really know how to navigate that space. And, you know, this would be another conversation for another time, talking about like how to navigate spaces of deep intimacy and connection. Because I think because we're so starved of connection and we've got so much wounding, we don't actually know how to connect in healthy ways in a deep way.
Absolutely. And I think, again, women are looking for that connection before, like even in business relationships, they're looking for the connection, the relationship, and the intimacy before they go on to like form a professional relationship a
Yep,
lot of times. I
absolutely.
know that was true,
Absolutely.
for
Totally
me,
me.
like when I started to heal this sister wound, I had this, like, I just felt this longing within me to be around other women.
Mhm.
And I was in real estate at the time, and I was in a lot of networking groups already, but they were male dominated. They were mostly men. And they were mostly just very, business, all business, professional. There wasn't a lot of like relationship building for obvious reasons, right? Men and women probably wouldn't do that as much in a professional um, setting. So anyway, I went and sought out like all women networking groups, and it was very much focused on let's get to know each other personally and see what happens, right? Like it wasn't
Yeah.
like, okay, you do mortgages, I do real estate, let's like work together. It was more like, let's just get to know each other, like share from our hearts. And then,
And that's where trust gets built, right?
Mhm.
So, one of the things I do love about the masculine is that they can do transactional relating really, really well. And that's a good skill to have. There's plenty of places where transactional relating for the purposes of making something happen and getting something done is absolutely a beautiful thing. But for women, if we're only doing transactional relating, I think we start to die inside. We
Yes,
are relationally oriented first, and our transactions, once we're relationally oriented, it is not transactional. It's like I'm giving you my client because I love you and I know you're going to like love on them as hard as I want to love on them, and they're in a really tender place, and I just need somebody that I can trust with their vulnerability.
exactly.
And
There
it's
has to be a
tag
lot
you're
of
it,
trust.
sister. You
Mhm.
know, whether she's a financial professional or a mortgage broker or definitely real estate, like, you know, like I ain't sending my sisters to any sharks.
Right, right.
And
Definitely.
we're that's how we women gatekeep in healthy ways of gatekeeping, right? Like,
Mhm.
and that's why like banning of women talking in those 1400s like really made everybody be in a vulnerable position to get taken advantage of, you know, or just subjugated or not being able to take care of themselves because, you know,
Yeah.
when we can control access to like when we have access to being able to take care of our people, you know, people get taken care of. And I think, you know, I think we as women were admitting our longing. We're seeing that you know, it's not just happening anymore. We have to create and seek it out. And
Mhm.
what does that look like? Right. And, you know, as you realized you needed to get into a women's only business networking chapter, right? So, like, women, I think, you know, we're both in the mom community. And so the community of just being able to talk to other moms at daycare or school pickup. But I'm also seeing that women are having a desire now for deeper connection than just the surface of we're in the same place at the same time and our kids are the same age.
100%.
Like
Yes.
we're desiring this deeper connection. And um I feel like nurturing that is the medicine, and
Hmm.
giving ourselves permission to want that and lean into that, and then identify like what does that mean for us, like, right, what does it mean for you to like desire deeper connection? Is it feeling seen, feeling held, just feeling nurtured? Is it spiritual work? And like where do those places that you feel comfortable opening up and looking for, right? Some people it's a walking group, some people it's an exercise group, some people it's a spiritual
Book club.
community. Some
Hmm.
people, it is a business networking group. I was so spiritually nourished by women in business networking groups, and then it turns out we're all fucking spiritual anyway. Like, I didn't necessarily seek out spiritual people. It just kind of happened when you gather women. Sometimes they just wind up angling towards the spiritual, and I think that's so magical. But, um,
Yeah. For me, it was just, I wanted to have deeper conversations. I got so frustrated with the
mm,
small talk, that was like, because like you're
mm,
saying, it was like school pickup, parental circles, but so much of that is focused outward on kids and their activities and, you know, the teachers and all that stuff. It's like I wanted someplace where and maybe this sounds selfish, but I could go have the connection be more focused inward on like my experience as a person, woman,
mm.
um, and not so much just about what's happening with the kids or with the town or whatever it was, right? And so I
I was like,
actually
how's my
formed,
husband's job doing? Yeah.
yeah, exactly. All the logistical things about life, like where do we get to reflect and just like be seen not as mothers or as a certain role that we're playing, but as, deep multi-dimensional spiritual beings having a physical experience. Like, when do we get to talk about that stuff? And so I
Right.
actually created a spiritual women's book club for that very reason. I was like, I want to have conversations that go deeper. And that was one of the most nourishing things I ever did to form deeper connection and sisterhood and
Mm.
just go beyond that small talk. So, yeah, finding like a common interest, right? Whatever that is, where you don't necessarily, it's not associated with a role, maybe
Yes.
that you're playing.
Yes. Yes. Where we're not
Yeah,
trying to fulfill any roles. Yeah.
but it's a passion. It's a, shared interest that you have with other women, and
Truly are, yeah.
that can be a great way to start building that sisterhood, that community. If you don't already have one, or if you don't have access to one, you can start to build your own. So, yeah, I know that we could keep going and maybe we'll do another episode on this because it's such a big and important and potent topic. But um, hopefully this was helpful and inspiring and just, brought to some women's awareness how this is such an impactful thing to create sisterhood, to start to see it not only as building a community, but also building a healthier relationship with yourself, your own
Yeah.
womanhood, your own femininity, and your own vulnerability. And it can be very rewarding, very empowering, and very healing. So I appreciate you being here, Alyssa. Thank you so
Yeah,
much.
thank you. And thank you everyone for tuning in we'd love to hear any comments or insights that dropped in for you by hearing this. And I personally didn't know that Sister Wound was a thing until Carrie kind of mentioned it in our work, and she was talking about something. And I was like, oh, ha ha. Funny story about that. Because I was very lucky growing up. I didn't have, gossipy, backbiting girlfriend, so like made it like girl unscathed all the way through my mid 20s, and only wound up having a sister wound in my second half of my 20s, which is just like mind-blowing, right? Because usually the middle school girl syndrome, or high school
Yeah.
girls can be super nasty. And so to be able to, it was really nourishing for me to have a frame of reference to understand what happened. And it was a situation where I was growing and accelerating at a pace where my close community and family, wasn't, and it just created a lot of tension and the relationships wound up rupturing, because the there weren't the same points of connection that we all used to have. And um and I think it can be really disorienting to have that experience. So maybe that'll go in a part two if we
Yeah.
talk about how to create safe containers and how do we actually nurture deep connection, because like we're talking a lot about like what our longings are and what our desires and what gets in the way, but like what does it actually look like to create safe connection and how can we facilitate that? Because we're not just falling into this, it's not working for us to just fall into it. There has to be some level of intentionality, um because we carry so many wounds, because we are, you know, a little bit suspicious of each other, because we're sussing out safety, because we're not sure what somebody's available for and we don't want to burden them, right? Like, you don't
Yeah.
really know where someone's availability or boundaries are, and we might not know where our own boundaries are. So there gets to be sort of like rules of the game, if you will. And it's not a game, but just like some
Rules of thumb. Yeah.
yeah, rules of thumb that can help facilitate these like deeper connection with people. And it allows you to be experience yourself with your own depth of
Mhm.
knowingness and self-acceptance. And sometimes, the only way that we can really know the depth of who we are sometimes is to have that reflected back at us in our communities. And especially if you've been sort of the scapegoat, right? How many people here have felt like they've been the group scapegoat? How many times, when you've had that wounding as well, being able to be held in a positive container for people who see your strengths, maybe where you don't recognize where you have some, that is very powerful for your self trust to start coming back online, and for you
Right.
to realize, oh, there's nothing actually wrong with me, even if the friendship disintegrated and died. I don't need to see me as the problem or them as the problem. I can just understand that it was a janky fit that nobody really had the skills to navigate.
Hmm. Yeah, I feel like this is definitely a great topic to go into more depth on for sure. So, yeah, stay tuned, everyone. Thank you so much for being with us today on the Feminine Frequency, and we'll see you on the next episode. Take care.